Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordyn and welcome to this recent reads wrap-up video. Basically, I need to wrap up all of the books that I read in October, November, and December of last year. We're gonna go month by month. I'm gonna do a little bit of a stats breakdown at the start of each month to summarize my reading, and then we'll go through all of the books that I read for videos, and those book reviews I'm gonna keep very short because I have reading vlogs for a lot of them. So I'll link you to the video, and if you wanna hear more in-depth thoughts about any of those books, you can go check those videos out. And then I do have a few books each month that I have not reviewed on here yet or talked about in any videos. So those are the ones I'm gonna spend a little bit more time on, giving their full synopses and some of my more in-depth thoughts on them. Because it's 3 months to cover, I'm gonna try to keep it quick. And then I'm very excited to do, after this, a video wrapping up my entire year of reading, looking through all the statistics, all the goals, all of that, to figure out my yearly reading trends and set some goals for next year. But that's not what we're doing today. Let's go ahead and get into my October reading wrap-up. So in October, I read 13 books and DNF'd 2 of them. Of the 13 books that I finished, 10 of them were for videos, 1 was for a book club, and 2 were just for fun. As far as genre breakdown, 7 of the 13 books I finished were mystery thrillers, 3 were contemporaries, 1 science fiction, 1 historical fiction, and 1 nonfiction. As far as star ratings go, I had 0 1-star books, 2 2-stars, 3 3-stars, 5 4-stars, and 3 5-star books to make an average of 3.69. As far as formats of reading these books, 7 of the 13 were books that I own physically and read physically. That's definitely a recent shift. I used to be much more focused on audiobooks, and recently I've gotten more into physical books again. 3 of the books I finished I own physical copies of, but did listen to primarily on audio. 2 of the books I read were ebooks that I got through NetGalley, and then only 1 book I listened to the audio and didn't own a physical copy of. As far as author demographics, 11 of the 13 books were written by female authors and 2 were written by male authors. And then diverse representation, 4 of the 13 books had some sort of diversity represented in the author or main characters. That could include race, sexuality, disability, etc., which is 31% of my reading. And then as far as publishers, 11 of the 13 books were published by one of the big 5 publishers, and only 2 were published independently. To go ahead and get into the books that I actually finished in October, the first set of 4 books were for my October ARCs reading vlog, part 2. So those included Midnight is the Darkest Hour by Ashley Winstead. This is a dark, character-focused mystery book that I rated 5 stars. Then I read The Quiet Room by Terry Miles. This is a sci-fi sequel to a book called Rabbits that I rated 3 stars. Then I read Hookshot by Kennedy Ryan, which is the 3rd book in a romance series. I rated it 4 stars. And then in that video, I also talk about a book called Dragged to the Wedding by Andrew Gray, which I unfortunately DNF'd. The next video I posted in October was an Aardvark reading vlog in which I attempted to read 5 books. The first one is Death Valley by Melissa Broder. This is kind of a weird one. It's a contemporary book with some sort of magical realism elements to it, but I ended up enjoying it and giving it 4 stars. Then I read The Drowning Woman by Robin Harding, which is a domestic thriller that I rated 4 stars. Then I finished Learn by Heart by Emma Donoghue, which is a historical fiction that I rated 2 stars. And then I also finished How Can I Help You by Laura Sims, which is a kind of a literary mystery thriller that I rated 2 stars. Also in that video, I did attempt and DNF the book Bridge by Laura Bukes. That was a sci-fi book that just got a little too hard to understand for my personal taste. The third and final video that I posted in October was a book of the month reading vlog where I read and finished 3 books. The first was The Leftover Woman by Jean Kwok. This is a bit of a literary mystery book similar to Little Fires Everywhere, and I loved it, gave it 5 stars. Then I read The Intern by Michelle Campbell. This is a legal thriller about a law student that I gave 3 stars. And last book for that video was The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer, a whimsical contemporary book that I also absolutely loved and gave 5 stars. All right, as for the books that I have not talked about yet that I read way back in October, let's start with Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. This is a sci-fi thriller, I would say, about this crew that is in space. They're exploring space when all of a sudden they come across this huge spaceship that is built like a cruise ship and is completely abandoned. This ship had gone off the grid, completely dark, a number of years ago. No one ever knew what happened to them. It was presumed that all of the people on the ship and all the crew members died, but no one was ever able to locate it. And because this crew stumbles upon it, they decide to board the ship and they find out what happened. The setting and atmosphere in this book is so good. It's so creepy being on this ghost cruise ship in space. It's fun because it's futuristic, so they talk about some cool technology, but there are no living people on it, so it's creepy. There's a portion of it where there's no electricity, so it's dark. The idea of this ship is that it's kind of like the Titanic in that it was the first of its kind. It was the biggest vessel that was going on a space cruise. It was mostly extremely wealthy people, so it's super fancy, but something ultimately went wrong, and I really enjoyed the experience of finding out what that was. By the end of this book, it gets very action-packed, and I enjoyed that end part less. I definitely enjoyed the initial kind of exploration part more, so I ended up giving it 4 stars, but I would highly, highly recommend it if basically a sci-fi thriller set in space sounds up your alley. It was really fun to read, and I would really enjoy a movie adaptation of this book. I don't know if anyone's working on that, but I would definitely watch it. All right, the next book that I read in October is The Bandit Queens by Parini Shroff. This is a mystery set in India. It's about this woman whose husband has gone missing. And in her village, no one knows what happened to the husband, and eventually rumors start to spread that she killed him. And this is kind of a fun, feminist, not really cozy mystery, but it's kind of a fun mystery that kicks off when one of the women in her village comes to her and asks her to kill her husband. She doesn't want to do it, but you learn all about the different dynamics within this community. There's a lot of commentary about the patriarchy. It was really fun, and also by the end of it, gets action-packed. I was pretty invested in it the entire time. I gave it 4 stars. And I think I would recommend it to fans of like Finley Donovan is Killing It, because it has that similar trope of a woman getting herself into this kind of criminal mess that she didn't intend to be in, but she can't get out of. And you're rooting for her, but you're also kind of rooting for her to do the bad thing, to do the villainous thing. That's really fun to me. And so if you want that, but set in India, this is your perfect combination. The last book that I finished in October is Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. This is not a book that I would have picked up on my own. My husband actually requested that I read it because he had read it in advance of the movie adaptation coming out recently with Leonardo DiCaprio. So I obliged. I said I would read it, and it was okay. It is a nonfiction book about the Osage Native American community and a string of murders that were happening there in like the 1920s that were going unsolved. The local police were not really making any progress, and the book tells the story of the origin of what is now the FBI. I knew nothing about this story, so this was all brand new to me, and I do appreciate that the story is being told. It sounds like it's somewhat of an unknown, untold history up to this point, and I can appreciate that. However, to me, it felt like a textbook. I don't do well with nonfiction books that are basically just an account of history. Even though this book is often described as narrative nonfiction, it's told in a way that's supposed to feel like a fiction book. I was just bored through most of it. It's told in 3 separate parts, so they did feel distinctly different, and I think most readers would probably gravitate towards 1 or 2 of the parts more than others. In discussing this book with my husband, it's funny because we actually kind of had different opinions on each of the parts, which is cool and it's great to discuss, and I am glad I read it because he asked me to. But had I been reading it just for myself, I probably would have DNF'd it. I sadly am not that interested in watching the movie adaptation after reading it either. I don't know. I don't feel like anything was wrong with the book. It just wasn't really a book for me. It didn't hold my attention. I rated it 3 stars because I would recommend it to people who actually are interested in this topic and want to hear that history, but unfortunately was not my favorite. All right, moving right along into November, I read fewer books. I read 6 books and DNF'd 3. Of the 6 books that I finished, only 1 was for a video, although some of the DNFs were also for a video. And then 5 of them were for other reasons. Genre breakdown: 4 of the 6 I finished were mystery thrillers, 1 was a historical fiction, and 1 was actually a fantasy. As far as ratings, 0 1 stars, 0 2 stars, 1 3 star, 4 4 stars, and 1 5 star for an average of 4.0. As far as formats go, 3 of the books I owned physical copies of and read physically. 3 of the books I owned physical copies and listened to the audio. For author demographics, 6 of the 6 books were written by female authors, 0 by male authors. One caveat there is that 3 of the books were written by the same author, so really it was only 4 total female authors that I read. And then as far as diverse representation, only 1 of the 6 books featured some sort of diversity, or 17%. And last but not least, for November stats, all 6 of the books were published by one of the big 5 publishers, which is unfortunate but not too surprising. Let's talk about the videos from November. So the first video that I posted was me reading books that I had previously put into an anticipated releases video. I attempted to read 4 books for that video. I only finished 1 of them. And again, I talk about why much more extensively in that blog if you would like to go watch it. The one that I did finish is 5 Survive by Holly Jackson, which is a young adult thriller that I rated 4 stars. The ones that I attempted but did not finish are The Union by Leah Vernon, which is a young adult dystopian book that unfortunately didn't work out for me. The Ingenue by Rachel Kapelke-Dale, which is an adult kind of character-driven mystery sort of book. And lastly, Keep It in the Family by John Mars, an adult mystery thriller. All 3 of those books were very different. I DNF'd them for very different reasons, but didn't end up finishing them. The next 2 books I was going to read for a video. It just didn't end up coming to fruition, and that is the first 2 books in the Good Girl's Guide to Murder series by Holly Jackson. I have the 3rd book on my shelf, and after I finish that one, I might do some sort of video talking about my thoughts on that series as a whole. Long story short, I read them while I was traveling, so I didn't have as much time to vlog my feelings as I wanted to. And to be honest, I kind of forget some of my in-depth thoughts about these books now because time has passed and I didn't do a great job of documenting them. But I did rate the first book 4 stars. I was pretty impressed with it for a young adult mystery. I thought it had some clever twists and reveals, so for the most part I was satisfied. However, I was a little disappointed by the second book. I did not think that the mystery was nearly as intriguing as the first one. I felt far less invested in our main character solving the mystery, so I rated that one 3 stars. The next book that I finished in November is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was a reread for me. I picked this book to read for an in-person book club that I help lead discussions for. Because it's one of my favorites and because it's so popular with the general public, I thought it would be a good one for the book club, and it definitely was. This is a 5-star book for me. It was 5 stars upon reread. I am sure everyone watching knows what this book is about, but it's a historical fiction about the life of Evelyn Hugo, who is a fictional Hollywood starlet who had 7 husbands, and you find out why. I just think this book is so interesting. I loved learning about Evelyn Hugo. I loved discussing in a group the dynamics of her life, some of the hard life lessons she learns as she's not a perfect human or a perfect character. The ending of this book just always hits me, so it hit again upon reread. I listened to the audiobook this time and really enjoyed that experience. So 5-star book for me. Definitely recommend it if for some reason somehow you haven't read it yet. On the flip side, the next book I read is a book I'm sure many of you have not read. It's called The Revenge Game by Jordyn Taylor. This is an author that I have read from before. I've actually done a vlog at this point a couple of years ago where I read 2 of this author's books because she has the exact same name as me, spelled the same and everything. She writes young adult books, and this is her latest young adult mystery thriller. This one is set at a boarding school, and it's about this group of girls who bands together to get revenge on this group of guys who started this contest to basically see how far they could get with the girls at their school. So the girls take it back in their hands. In a lot of ways, this book was really cheesy. It's over the top with its tropes and characterization, and it's fairly predictable where it's ultimately gonna go, but I still enjoyed it. Obviously, it's a young adult book, so some of that comes with the territory, but I do feel like this book did something new with some of the feminist themes that it explores. I think it's ultimately a positive and good message, so I always enjoy recommending that. I definitely wouldn't recommend this book if you know young adult angsty type books are not for you, but if you sometimes like YA mystery thrillers or you are a young adult and you want to read more in that age range, then I thought this one was fun and I gave it 4 stars. And then the last book that I read in November is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is the fantasy book that I read, and if you have watched me for a while, you know that I very rarely read fantasy books. The only reason I picked this one up is because I heard from many trusted sources that this book actually leans a lot more historical fiction than fantasy, which I agree with. So because of that, I enjoyed it. This is a young adult book about two young adults who are both new reporters. They work for the same newspaper and they have kind of a rivalry. They, I think at the start of this book, are competing for one full-time columnist position. So there's some fun banter between them, but then what's also happening is they both own these typewriters that are magically connected. This is where the fantasy comes into play. So they write basically anonymous letters to each other. They get sent magically through their typewriters. They get to know each other without knowing who each other is, although one of them finds out sooner than the other. So it's kind of a mistaken identity, secret relationship they're forming on top of this rivalry they have in their workplace. And then the plot really takes off when the girl decides that she wants to go to the front lines of a war that's going on. This is the part that really feels like historical fiction because as far as I understand, it's kind of based on World War I. But she goes to the front lines, decides to become a reporter telling stories from the war, and he follows her. This book was really good. It is ultimately a romance between them, and I really liked seeing their relationship develop. I thought the rivalry was fun, and it was clear that they had a deeper connection based on their letters together. The fantasy elements, I mean, I had to just get past them to enjoy the story. The typewriter thing was fine, but also this war that's going on is a war between gods, and there are like sub-stories weaved into this book about the history of those gods that I really just can't care about. So I rated this book 4 stars. Honestly, it probably would have been 5 stars had it not included those fantasy elements. But even despite them, I did really enjoy it. This is part 1 of a duology. The second book just came out in December. I have not obtained that book yet, but I will be in the nearest future and definitely will read it right away. I'm hoping I enjoy the second one as much as the first one, but I am pleasantly surprised that I enjoyed the first one at all. All right, and with that, let's move forward to December, which is going to be extremely quick because I only read 2 books in December. I don't know what to say. I was just enjoying my family time. I wasn't feeling guilty at all about not reading. I had all my content planned that didn't require any reading from me, so I just didn't do it. 2 books finished, 0 DNFs, 0 books for videos. The 2 that I read were just for fun. Both books that I read were contemporary romances. The ratings I gave, one was 3 stars, one was 4 stars, for an obvious average of 3.5. Both books I owned physical copies of and read physically. Both books were written by female authors. One of the 2 includes diverse representation, or 50%. Both books were published by one of the big 5 publishers. Let's talk about what they were. The first one is Holiday Romance by Catherine Walsh. I finally made time for this book after hearing so many people talk so highly of it. This is about these 2 main characters who every year around Christmas take the same flight home together. They both live in the US, but are both from Ireland, so they take that international flight home together every year. So this book actually feels a lot like People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, because it's this couple of friends that have so many years of history between them. And this book, similar to that one, includes flashbacks of years prior, which kind of shows us the ups and downs of their relationship. And then in the present day, what's happening is there is a big snowstorm grounding them at their airport, and they are trying to do everything they possibly can to get home for Christmas. This one was fun. I really have no gripes about it. I would classify it as kind of a cutesy romance. While yes, there is conflict and yes, there is some depth to the characters, it's not overly emotional or anything like that. And I typically prefer emotional, deeper romances. So again, this one was just fine for me. I had a fun time reading it. It was fun reading it around the holidays. I actually started it when I was on a flight, so it was kind of fun reading about them in an airport while I was in an airport. But beyond that, I didn't have a super deep connection to the characters or anything, so I ultimately rated it 3 stars. And then last but not least, the last book that I finished in December and finished for this year is Technically Yours by Denise Williams. This book, I was sent an advance copy by the publisher, which I really appreciate. It came out in December. It follows two characters that come from a different book that Denise Williams has written. I forget what it's called, but I have read it. Basically, this man co-owns a company. This woman used to be his assistant. At the time this book kicks off, she has moved on to another role, but right before she left, they had like a moment together that now they both constantly think about. She had moved away to take this new role, but now is back in town. So they're back in each other's orbit. This is somewhat of a STEM romance because she now works for this coding company and he is convinced to become a mentor at that company because a lot of their mission is teaching kids how to code, which is great. I loved that element of it. Again, this book was mostly fine. I have nothing bad to say about it. I typically enjoy STEM romances. Once again, this one is not overly emotional, I would say. So I could have used a bit more of that if I was going to love this book, but I generally enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. If it sounds like a romance that you would enjoy, then I would recommend picking it up. And overall, it was a good book to end my reading year on. So that is it for my final 2023 reading wrap up. Please let me know if you have read any of the books that I talked about, what your thoughts were. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? How did your reading go for the last few months of the year? As you can see, I definitely declined in each of these months in terms of number of books that I read, but I can already tell you that we are turning that right around in January. I have hit the ground running and we'll have many more books to talk about in my January wrap up, so keep an eye out for that. Other than that, I don't think I have anything else, so thank you so much for watching this video and I will see you in my next one.